I'll just start. That I'm Kelly Gregg Rubing, and I started Wanderlust Women. This is our fourth year of doing trips. I've had a travel agency for almost 30 years, actually. So very familiar with planning trips. But a couple years ago, I started doing a lot of solo travel, and people were saying, "Oh, I wish I could do that," or I don't know how, or uh, don't seem to have the time or the wherewithal to get it going. And so I started Wanderlust Women as a way that women could travel together. And it's been really successful. It's kind of launched after I did Machu Picchu. And so that was my first foray into sort of challenging hikes, and I loved it. So it's always been my vision to have the trips be at least one that's more of a challenging hiking or fitness oriented type of trip, and then one that's for anybody. We do typically sort of incorporate challenges into those, like we've done glacier hikes or e-bikes or segways, just because I think it's fun, and this is a very supportive group to kind of have those challenges. But last year was our first all hiking trip, and then this will be the second. So what what I think, actually, let me start by sharing my screen so that we can go over the itinerary. I'm going to go over some general things and then go through the itinerary day by day, and then we'll have time for questions. So let me know, are you all seeing the itinerary come up? I hope.
Yep, I can see it.
I don't know why it wants to be stuck on this picture, but let's see. Just a moment. Oh my goodness. Sorry. Bring it back up here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So, just to start, this is a hiking trip, and so there is a certain level of fitness expected to be able to do it. My feeling is that anybody can do it. For the most part, I mean, injuries aside, but is the key is that you need to train. And last year we did have some group trainings pretty much every week. We Saturdays typically we would go to Purisma and start off between 4 to 6 miles, and then we worked our way up 6 to 8, and then we worked our way up to 10. And so I think even if you're not in the area, because I know a few people aren't, that the key is just to make sure that you are getting that training in. And the other key is to get the altitude in. And by that, it's not just the like Machu Picchu was at altitude, and I had to like prepare for that and take meds. It's not so much that, because this isn't as high as that is. It's getting the elevation in of learning to, or at least practicing the hills, both the up and the down, because I think that's what we found the most challenging part of our hike last year. So we plan to incorporate that into what we do locally. And then if you're training on your own, there is a difference, I think, between hiking and walking. It's not just getting steps in, but it is, training on some of that more challenging kind of terrain. Now, Scottish weather will be another consideration on this. We are going at a good time of year to go, but rain can certainly be a factor. And so we'll have a packing list for this, but And of course, good hiking shoes, but having rain gear and stuff will be part of that. I know when we were in Iceland, when we had rainy days and there were hikes involved, we just went anyway. So, and we did have one very stormy day last year on our trip too. And not everyone, but several brave souls, actually, I think all three of them are on this call, did do that really rainy day. Um, so one of the things I'm going to do differently on this trip is that last year we arrived and it happened to be the day that there was the entire tech meltdown and all the flights got canceled last year, if you remember that. And that's when everybody was getting in. Some of them delayed to like 2 in the morning. And then the next day we did a very challenging hike. So this year we have 2 days built in to start, where the first day is, and we'll go through the itinerary, but it's just arrival in Glasgow. And the next day is touring in Glasgow. And then we'll be going on to Fort William, which is a base for 5 nights, which is another difference. Last year, it was point to point. And so our luggage was transferred for us, but it was more challenging if you wanted to take a rest day because you still have to get to the next starting point. This trip will be 5 days. We have the same starting point. Well, I should say we have the same base. We don't always start there. Part of the trip is that they take us to our different starting points each day, and that's on the itinerary. So it makes it a little easier if you do want to take a rest day, that you'll just stay in the same inn and you don't have to transfer yourself anywhere. And as I mentioned, I do encourage, if anybody needs a rest day, to take it. And it will be pretty straightforward on this trip to be able to do that. I think that's most of the general information. Just going through the itinerary. The air is up to everybody to book on their own, although I'm always happy to point you in the right direction if you do need any help with that. Basically, you can arrive anytime. You'll depart on the 13th, which is a Friday, and you can arrive anytime on the 14th. The transfer will be on your own, but they do have Uber there and they do have taxis there. And then you'll get yourself to the hotel, which is centrally located. If you're in before 3, you can drop your bags and go out and explore. Usually any time after 3, they can get you checked in. And typically so this trip does not have any meals included except breakfast. So meals are on your own, but usually for dinner, we're probably going to be about 8 to 10 people for this. So I usually try to make a reservation somewhere so we can all eat together if we want. It just makes it easier. But if anybody's exhausted or getting in late, it's optional. And the way the lunches will work when we're doing the hiking is that each day, as I understand it, they'll let us know how we'll get lunch, whether that's having time the day before to go to a local deli or grocer, or that morning. But they said that the guides will let us know how we do that each day. And then, so the first day is just arrival. The next day, we have 2 fun things planned. Well, breakfast at the hotel, and you have the morning free. And then we're going to do an afternoon tea on a sightseeing bus, like a vintage double-decker bus. And this is just a sightseeing bus. It's not like you're enjoying the tea and you're being driven around Glasgow, but it's not like they're not giving a lot of commentary necessarily. But then that evening, we're doing a walking tour with a guide, and that's where we'll get the history and the commentary and can ask questions. And it also involves some whiskey tasting. So that's what we'll do that evening. And then again, dinner's on our own, or we can have together. The next day, we will all train together to Fort William. It's about 4 hours. It'll be a direct train. And the guest house is within like 7-minute walk of the train station. So there aren't weight restrictions, which we did have last year on this trip, but you do have to be able to get your luggage on the train and take it for a 7-minute walk to the hotel and manage all that on yourself. So it's still something to keep in mind when packing. But since we don't have to have it transferred point to point like we did before, that makes it a little bit easier. So then we will check in at Fort William. We're staying at an inn there. We'll meet our guide there. We have a welcome meeting at 3 where we meet the guide that will be with us for the whole time. They give us the kind of what to expect for the week, which they will do also daily on the trip. They tell us each day, what time we're starting the next day, what to expect, what we might need to bring, what we're doing, how we're doing lunch, all of that. And then we do have a little introductory hike that first afternoon as well, led by our guide. So that's our first day in Fort William. And then, and this is a little info about the guest house that we will stay in for the whole time. And then we start our hiking. So if you've taken a look at the itinerary, you probably see that each day it says how many hours to expect the hike is, what the mileage is, and what the elevation gain is, which, like I said, is what we learned last year was one of the more the things to pay attention to because we found that to be the more challenging, um, even more so than just how far we were going. This compared to last year, um, it is still challenging. I don't think it's quite as challenging, but it's still a challenging hike. But although it varies a bit from day to day, this first one's not too bad. So basically, we're going through different sections of the Highlands. It's sometimes, as I said, that we'll be starting from the inn, although I think that's only once, and the rest of the time they take us to where we start, so that we're kind of continue. Some of it's different, and some of it is a continuation from the day before. So the first day concentrates on the West Highland Way. The next day, we finished the West Highland Way section, and then we're on our third full day of hiking doing the Great Glen Way, and then we do Ben Nevis, which is considered kind of the most challenging part of the hike, and it is our second to last day. So for if anyone was feeling like they wanted to opt out of that, that's fine. They actually give us two guides that day. Our general flow of how we've done this before is that the guide typically takes up the rear and asks us to stop at certain points. And so we don't all have to stay on the same pace, but we do typically try to have points where we know we're going to kind of catch up. Certainly lunch is one of them, and make sure we're all still there, and then we continue on. And by the end, if when we know what our end point is, if people are getting there at different times, that's okay too. In this case, we're usually going to be being driven back to our inn, so we kind of all have to be there before we leave, but we don't all have to stay on the exact same pace, but no one gets left behind either. This isn't which was true last year too, even this isn't something where you have a sweeper van behind you, so to speak. Once you're committed to the day, you're pretty committed to the day because we're not on roads. And so you do have to be able to complete that day's hike essentially. I've done like a back roads trip where they could sort of follow along in a van, or there were points where a van could pick us up, but that's not really the way it is for this one. And then our last day, the seventh day of the trip, we'll have breakfast. We have a short hike in the morning, just 6 miles, which won't feel like as much at that point. And so at that point, we're done at 1 o'clock, and people who are going to continue on to Isle of Skye, we're going to take the train to where the ferry is, and then we take a ferry, and then we go into Isle of Skye. And for those who aren't doing that, they will take the train back to Glasgow. If you have an evening flight, you'd be able to fly out that night, or you would take the train back to Glasgow, overnight in Glasgow, which would be separate. I can help you book it, but it's not included, and you'd fly out the next day. Or if you really wanted to leave that afternoon, you could also skip that morning's hike and take the train to Glasgow, to the airport, so that you can get out by the early afternoon. So those are the options for that day. I know not everybody is necessarily going on the extension, but just I'll run through that briefly. So we will be taking the train, which I'm excited about, the Jacobite steam train, which they also call the Harry Potter train, to where the ferry will take us over to Portree. Well, it takes us over to Isle of Skye, but our destination is Portree. And that's what this picture is. So that day will be about the train, the ferry, and getting there, but with some scenic driving as we get there. The next day, we'll be in Portree for 2 nights. The next day, we'll start the morning. There is a like a circuit around Portree, which is where that really cute, colorful harbor is. And so we'll be doing a walk that morning, breakfast, and then we have a private driver. Actually, we have a private driver from the time we leave Fort William, who's also the guide. And we'll go to what's called the ferry pools. That's what this is. And we take a little hike that takes us out to that. And then we will also go to what they call Old Man of Store, and that's going to be another hike that we'll do. Our guide that I have is also experienced in hiking, so he'll be doing that with us. And then we'll also just be seeing the landscape and the area around Isle of Skye and having lunch. So that's going to be a day of sightseeing and hiking. Actually three hikes that day. And then the next day after our 2 nights in Portree, we will take our driver will take us. We'll leave Isle of Skye and we'll go to Eilean Castle, which is actually there's a picture of it here. It's kind of almost like it's on its own little island, and we have a tour of that. And then we'll also going to go to Loch Ness. I don't think I have a picture of that. And we're going to have a cruise on the Loch Ness. And then that day we end up that evening in Pitlochry. That's what this picture is, a little small. And have an overnight there. Actually, I think that's Pitlochry too. That's our hotel. And then the next day, the guide will take us to Edinburgh and he'll give us a tour of Edinburgh. It'll be a walking tour, but then he'll take us to the castle, give us the history of the castle, and then we will tour the castle on our own. And then we also that afternoon, it's Edinburgh, have a tour of what's called Real King Mary Close. That's this, which is an underground tour of Edinburgh and kind of takes you through the old part of the city and tells stories about what life was like then. So I think that will be cool too. That's our hotel for Edinburgh. And then the next day, it's departure for, again, the transfers to the airport and the flights are on your own, but they have Uber, they have taxis. And as we know what people's flights are, we can figure out who can go together at what time. So that's kind of a rundown of the itinerary. So I'm happy to take questions on that in a moment. But I will just mention that they do now have a new ETA, an electronic travel authorization for Britain. It's very straightforward. You do it online, through the app. And I don't know if I have, I do have the price. It's 10 pounds. It's good for 2 years. And so you will need to get that before we travel. And they are theoretically starting one, but it's not in place yet for the rest of Europe if you are planning to go anywhere else. So we can talk about that. But like I said, it's not actually operating yet. And it will also be good for 2 years. This is kind of a new requirement just to be aware of. We have it in the US, have for years for Europeans or British people coming to our country, but now they're starting it. It's just not quite a visa, but an electronic entry kind of thing that you have to fill out. Okay, so that is kind of a quick rundown. Does anybody have any questions or anything they wanted to add?
I have just a question about hiking poles. Is
Yeah.
that something that we should plan to pack on our own, or is that something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we did last year, and you can pack them in your checked bags. So
Yeah.
you want to get the kind that fold down, which I think they pretty much all do. You theoretically can't take them in carry on. So if you're only going to take carry on, then I might need to. I'm going to make that a note. Find out if you can get them there. My guess is Fort William is absolutely going to have them because it's kind of it's a center for hiking and for these kinds of trips. So I am quite sure that they will have hiking shops if you really want to only do carry on. Um, some people have said that that you can bring hiking poles on your carry on, but officially, what I have looked up has said no. So I don't want to tell anybody, yeah, you can bring them, and then that's for sure going to be when you get them taken. I know Audrey, they had told us last year we could rent that they had places you could rent them, but they really didn't. She ended up buying them. So I think if at all possible, it's better. And they were more expensive than they would have been at home. So if you can bring them in packed bags, that would be the best choice. Um, Otherwise, you should be able to get them there, I think. Okay.
Kelly, on the rest day, like if you do want to take a rest day, are there things to do in Fort William or there?
Yeah, there. I mean, it's a town and has shops and restaurants. But that was something I had been kind of thinking of looking into if there's something that's more of a low key, thing to do on a rest day. So I'll look at that. But
Yeah,
yeah, it is a town, so you're not just like stuck in the middle of nowhere.
right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I have a question about the training hikes. Are
Yeah.
they ever on a Sunday? Because I always work on Saturday.
Yeah, we do them both days.
Okay.
Typically, what we've been doing is Saturday, we tend to make our longer one. And we sort of eased up the mileage on those as we went along. Sundays, we were doing, remind me where you are, Jennifer.
I'm in San Jose.
Oh, you're in San Jose. Okay. And last year I had ideas of making a set in stone schedule, and there's some flux to it because we all have lives, and sometimes nobody could make it, or the majority of people could make Sunday and not Saturday, so we'd make that our longer one. So there is some fluctuation to it, but typically made Saturdays our longer one, and Sundays we pretty much we're consistently doing Polgus Ridge in Redwood City and doing 4 miles on that. But we're also open, and we've talked to doing them around other places in the Bay Area, like Kathleen's actually in Santa Cruz, you're in San Jose. And I'm especially open if somebody wants to plan it and say, hey, let's do it this week here this time, because that's more your area. We're pretty open to that. We have hiked other places as well.
Yeah, that one that we did, what was it called? Big Bear Gulch or whatever,
Yeah.
off 17 right there. That's a good hike. Good
Yeah.
time to
And
do
and
that.
Kathleen and Lorraine did some midweek ones. I forgot where, you would know, but
Yeah, we were up on Skyline, like
yeah.
yeah, Russian Ridge and things.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm totally open to switching it up. If anything, keeps it interesting. But also the fallback of having the consistency of Saturdays at Purisma, which is on 92, and Sundays at Polgus also kind of worked because we could just build it in. And then we also typically did a Wednesday evening when we could, just a shorter one, just so that we were kind of having something midweek as well.
Yeah, I don't mind driving, certainly.
Okay.
It's up the peninsula is fine. Wednesday night I tend to be working too, so
Yeah, I get it.
maybe sometimes you could switch a Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And you think the most mileage we should practice with is 12 or so?
That so last year the most we got to was 10 actually. So at least on our group walks. Lorraine, was that last one we did 10 or 12 actually?
It was 10.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought. So yeah, I would say it worked for us. Doing more is even better, but we do take breaks, of course, too. So it's not like it's a continuous not stopping 10, 12, 14 mile hike. We take a significant lunch break.
Kelly, do they have those what do they call them again? Do they have is
So
it
refuges.
yeah, do they have
That's a
something
good
similar?
question. I'm not as familiar with that for this, but
Yeah.
I'll find out. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's got to be a place where we can take potty breaks, I
Oh
guess.
yeah, I'm sure of that. And the guide will be familiar with that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is also an option that you, because you were saying every day we'll find out, what we need to provide for food.
Yeah.
Some of the refuges that we saw in Switzerland, I mean, they had like regular food that you
Right.
could order and stuff like that,
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
provide.
I am relying on, I did ask about it, but I'm relying on them, obviously to know that. I know for sure that they won't leave us hanging without provisions for lunch or going to the
Yeah.
bathroom,
Yeah.
but I don't know all of it offhand. But
No, no, no laying out of tablecloth and cutting up.
yeah, well, it could be. I mean, I actually am assuming that it might be either that we may be just going to markets in Fort William and getting what we need for the
Yeah.
day. And there's opportunities for some sharing or whatever,
Yeah.
which we kind of even did in our extension in Switzerland last year too. So, yeah.
And then the same question for the extension, if you don't feel like doing some of the hiking things there, is there, since I guess as long as we're not transferring hotels, it's okay to sit out on those as well,
You
right?
could, yeah. Those ones are not as strenuous. I would say the Old Man of Store is the more strenuous. The one in Pitlochry is more kind of walking around the town.
Mhm.
It's just more an option of it was only a couple miles to, more scenic. The ferry pools is actually also pretty low key, and I want to say it was only a couple of miles. I heard though it's quite a walk from the parking lot to the start of the trail.
Oh.
So Old Man of Store is the more challenging of those. The only thing I would say about that is we're all together in a private van with our guide. And so if
Yeah.
you opted out, I don't know if there's a cafe you could sit in or if that means you're sitting in your car, but it's not like where if you opted out of Fort William, you just hang back for the day and you can do what you want. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm thinking that we'll gear up our more kind of official training walks at the beginning of April. So I will be communicating with everybody about that. And I still have a couple of spots if people want to join. I think we're up to basically 8 people, which is great because the max I kind of want is 10, 12. It's nice that when it's a small group and it makes it easier to eat together. And so far we've been really lucky. All of my groups have been really nice people who didn't know each other before, are friends now, and we're a pretty supportive group and friendly. So I'm looking forward to having all of the new people join us, and always available for questions or whatever you need as well. And I will get a packing list out to you too. But the hiking poles was a good question. And then I think pretty much all of us, and for those of you who are already hikers, I'm sure you have your ways of how you like to do it. But most of us have adapted like using some kind of camelback, and we can fill it with water at the beginning of the day. There's usually ways to refill somewhere along the way as well. And that way you just have your little tube that you can put into your mouth, hold your rain clothes or change your socks or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so you do recommend a Camelback? I have a day pack that has kind of a built-in hydration system.
Bladder, yeah, any of them, and it doesn't have to be that brand, but
But
something.
you recommend that instead of like a day pack with bottles?
I do. I mean, truly, it's your preference, but then you're always asking someone to get the bottle out for you to put it
Okay.
back for you, or getting the pack off and getting it out. So I do think it's a lot easier to just kind of
Okay.
have it handy. Plus, you can hold more. Some of these trips, we're gone the whole day. The only thing I did learn last year is I did end up bringing a separate water bottle because when we stopped for lunch, I actually preferred to have this little separate water bottle to drink out of instead of getting the pack and putting the tube in my mouth. But, that's just preference.
And
Oh,
Kelly,
One
Oh,
other thing, I'm sorry. There was something about midges, how they're just like midges.
Yes. I've been reading about that too. And I'm going to put that on the packing list. They actually do recommend that you get kind of like maybe a hat with the netting because the midges, which are little bugs, can be a nuisance. We are going to be there in the time of year that they have them. We're not there in the worst time of year for them, which is July and August, but they do have them in June, and it is part of the hiking. They're smaller from what I can tell than, say, a mosquito. They're more like little gnats, but also from what I can tell, it's sort of like mosquitoes where they bother some people more than others. Like my son gets eaten up and I don't. So, you may already know from experience if you're somebody vulnerable to that. There's different advice I've seen about whether things like Avon Skin So Soft or equivalent is helpful. Some people say it is, some people say it's not, but the nets do seem to be the best thing. So I was going to put that information on the packing list. It's like you can put a little net in your hat or have a hat that has one and you just kind of pull them out and it protects your face. And then the rest of it you can, for the most part, keep covered.
And then Kelly, I was just going to note when you went over the itinerary, it was helpful, but it like Ben Nevis, it's in meters. So when we train, we should make that
Well, I put the mile, I'll check for Ben Nevis if I missed it, but I did put the equivalent for all of them.
yeah, like the elevation. So that's going to be a great day, but it's like 4,400 elevation.
That is the tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got the mileage on there too, and the feet. So it says 16 kilometers or 10 miles. Am I looking at Ben Nevis? Yeah, I am. With 1,340 meters or 4,400 feet of elevation gain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our hardest one.
Do you happen to know the actual elevation of Ben Nevis at the peak? What it is?
Don't. Or
I can look it up. There's an internet that I can.
yeah. Well, I'm also not entirely sure what our peak will be. So I'll ask.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, if things come up after that occur to you, let me know. As you get your air booked, if you could send that to me, that would be great. And I'll be in touch with about things like final payment or as I said, packing list. We typically have another Zoom meeting right before the trip so that we can go over more details or things that have come up. So we'll all be seeing each other again. And usually on that one, by the time, because this is also for people still considering the trip, at that point, I'll introduce ourselves a little more too when we know for sure who is going on the trip.
And this is an obvious question, but I want to make sure that I'm not being an idiot.
Yeah.
We fly into Glasgow, but
Yes.
out of Edinburgh.
If you're doing the extension, yes.
Yes.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's obvious, but
No, good question. Yeah, and for people just doing the main trip, round trip Glasgow, sometimes people have made their own arrangements to, go on. So that's one reason why I've have everybody book their own air. If you do have a connection, please don't make it any less than 2 hours. It's just gotten, I'd say probably about 30 to 40% of flights I deal with these days are significantly delayed or even canceled. Another reason why I'm giving us some grace on that first day. All you do is show up, but try not to book any short connections. Okay, well, great. Thanks, everybody. Good to meet you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks,
Thank
Kelly.
you.
All right.
Thank
Be in
you.
touch.
Bye.
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 bye.